Why this works. Pommes puree is at its core an emulsion problem. What makes a mashed potato silky rather than gluey comes down to how carefully the fat is introduced into the starch and water matrix of the cooked potato. Cooked potato cells contain swollen starch granules. When you rice the potato correctly, those cells break apart, but the granules stay mostly intact. What you have is a dry, granular mass with intact granule walls, capable of absorbing butter fat if the fat is introduced gradually and at the right temperature differential. The cold butter hitting the warm potato creates a controlled emulsion. The fat disperses into tiny droplets, stabilized by the potato's residual starch, and those fat droplets coat every starch granule, giving the puree its characteristic silky, light feel. The Robuchon ratio, approximately 1 part butter to 5 parts potato by weight, is far above what most home cooks use, and above what most restaurant kitchens outside France will go. It sounds extravagant until you understand what that butter is doing structurally. It is not just adding richness to taste. It is the emulsifying agent that converts a cooked rice starch into a fluid, pourable preparation with a glass-smooth surface. At lower butter ratios, the starch dominates the texture, and the puree becomes stiffer and less silky. At higher ratios, the emulsion can break, visible as pools of separated fat on the surface. The enemy of Pommes puree is the food processor. Mechanical blending at speed ruptures the intact starch granules and releases the gelatinized starch chains into free suspension, producing what French cooks call colle de pâte, paste glue. There is no recovery from overprocessed potato. The ricer and drum sieve work because their action is purely mechanical separation, not rotational tearing. Common mistakes. Using waxy potatoes. Target floury potatoes, Rat, Bincha, Yukon Gold, King Edward. High starch, low moisture. Why it matters? Waxy varieties, Charlotte new potatoes have thin-walled cells that turn gluey when riced. Floury varieties give the right dry granular base for emulsification. What to do? Buy specifically floury/starchy varieties. Avoid red and new potatoes. Workarounds. Only waxy available? Don't attempt Pommes puree. Make mashed potato instead. Different dish. Not drying after draining. Return drained potatoes to low-heat pot, 2 to 3 minutes to dry surface moisture. Why it matters? Boiling water enters cells. Without drying, the puree is dilute, and the potato can't absorb the full butter ratio. What to do? Drain, return to dry pot, shake gently over low heat until visible steam stops. Workarounds. Want to dry faster? Spread on a tray briefly in a warm oven. Adding hot butter. Cold butter, small cubes added gradually to warm riced potato. Hot butter melts and floods around the starch rather than emulsifying into it. The temperature differential between cold butter and warm potato is what creates the emulsion. What to do? Butter directly from fridge, cube small. Don't pre-soften. Workarounds. Butter already soft, refrigerate 15 minutes before using. Adding butter too quickly. Target each cube fully absorbed before next. About 30 seconds of stirring between additions. Why it matters? Rushed butter, emulsion separates. Visible butter pools form. Once broken, hard to recover. What to do? Stir until each cube disappears before adding next. Visual. Surface goes from dull to glossy with each addition. Workarounds. Broke. Add 1 tablespoon warm milk, plus stir vigorously. Sometimes rescues partially. Using a blender or food processor. Target. Ricer or drum sieve. Tamis. Never blender or processor. Why it matters. High-speed blending ruptures starch granules, releasing gelatinized starch chains. Paste glue. Colle de pâte. No recovery possible. What to do? Buy a proper ricer. The drum sieve gives the silkiest texture. Ricer is more accessible. Workarounds? No ricer, fine mesh sieve and rubber spatula. Slower but works. Serving too late. Target? Serve within 20 to 30 minutes of finishing. Pommes puree is short-lived. Why it matters. Silky texture starts to break down after 30 minutes. Emulsion separates. Surface forms a skin. The dish is fugitive. What to do? Time it with the meal. Make as the last step. Workarounds? Need to hold. Cover with cling film against the surface. Hold in bain-marie no more than 20 minutes. What to look for after ricing? Dry, fine, white granules. No moisture visible. No large lumps. If the riced potato looks wet or sticky, return it to the pot for another minute. First butter additions. The potato mass begins to shine. Each cube disappears, and the surface of the mixture changes from dull to slightly glossy. Mid-butter incorporation. The mixture is fluid enough to be pushed around the pan. This is the emulsion forming. The starch is now carrying fat droplets. After milk. Flows off a spoon in a slow, thick ribbon. The puree should hold its shape briefly when mounded, but settle slowly, not stiff, not liquid. Chef's view. The Robuchon recipe was published and demonstrated many times, most famously on French television in the 1990s, when audiences saw the volume of butter going into what appeared to be a simple vegetable preparation, and found it either revelatory or alarming. Joël Robuchon's famous answer to the shock. I put in the butter until it's good, and then I put in a little more. The practical question for home cooking is how strictly to follow the ratio. At the full 1:5 butter to potato ratio, this preparation is simultaneously the best and the richest mashed potato possible. For most home contexts, 150 grams of butter per kilogram of potato, 1 to 6.7, is more realistic, and still produces something far better than a standard mash. The technique, cold butter, slow incorporation, a ricer, matters more than hitting the exact number. My own view on the milk: warm the milk carefully and add it last, in small amounts to adjust consistency. The butter builds the emulsion, the milk just loosens it to serving consistency. Some versions skip the milk entirely and achieve a slightly stiffer, more intense version. The choice depends on what the puree will sit beside on the plate. Chef test notes, tested with 3 potato varieties side by side: Ratte, Yukon Gold, and Charlotte. Ratte produced the smoothest, most buttery result. Small, waxy on the outside, but dry and floury within. Yukon Gold was close and more accessible. Charlotte turned noticeably gluey, even with careful ricing, confirming that variety selection is not cosmetic. Also tested the butter addition tempo. Cubes added every 15 seconds versus every 45 seconds. The slower addition produced a measurably silkier texture with no visible fat separation.